So first we're going to start over here in the state of Nevada. Over here in Nevada, if we look, the early vote currently, the Republicans are leading on both mail-in and early person votes cast at around, what is that, like 5 points. And in terms of mail-in ballots requested, they're also leading, which is pretty interesting, by 3 points. But when you look in 2020, it says that combined mail-in and early in-person ballots, Democrats actually led by 4 points. And so just judging off of the 2020 results in 2024, I don't really see the Democrats repeating the success that they had in 2020. And so in terms of where I'm going to put Nevada, I'm going to say it leans Republican solely because of this. Next up, we're going to be going to Arizona. And if you're wondering in the map, we're just going to go from west to east. So in Arizona right now, we have our mail-in and early in-person votes with a Republican lead of almost 10 points. It's around 9 points. And in terms of mail-in ballots requested, we also have a Republican lead of around 5 points. So when we compare it to 2020's results, we would see that in Arizona, Republicans also had a lead. In terms of mail-in ballots, they had a lead by around 3 points, and in terms of mail-in and early person ballots, they had a lead of about 3 points. Now this lead is pretty staggering for Republicans. We're almost seeing a 10-point lead with over 2 million votes already casted. So I don't really see how the Democrats can come back here in Arizona and flip the state, and so I think it's going to go to the Republicans. Or, well, I guess they did flip the state in 2020, but yeah, that's what's going to happen, in my opinion, right now, as of right now. And then we're going to look at Minnesota next. So for Minnesota, we do see a pretty large gap. This is a 20-point lead that the Democrats have in terms of mail-in and early in-person votes. And in terms of mail-in ballots requested, they also have around a 20-point lead, although it's more like 19. And if we look in 2020 to Minnesota's numbers, you'll also notice that Democrats had a significant lead. And in this one, they actually only had around a 13-point lead, which does show me that they're performing much better right now in the early vote, which is interesting because Trump has called for Republicans to vote early, and it seems like in Minnesota, they're not really doing that. So I'm going to say that Minnesota goes to Kamala Harris and leans Democratic. Next, we'll go to Wisconsin, another critical battleground state. And in Wisconsin, we also notice a pattern where it's around 10 points that the Democrats lead in terms of mail-in early in person and in mail-in votes. And if we look in 2020 for Wisconsin, we see that the Republicans actually had the lead of almost 10 points. It's around 7-8 points in both mail-in and early in-person ballots. And so just judging off of these trends, while Wisconsin has been a historically Republican state, especially when you compare it to Michigan or Pennsylvania, I just don't see it flipping to Republicans, or I see it going to the Democratic Party simply because of these early vote comparisons. And if you also look on YouTube and you look at videos of people being interviewed in Wisconsin, I see a lot of Kamala Harris support, so I don't expect it to go red, but it could go red just because it is supposed to be the most Republican state. In terms of Michigan, on the early vote, and also remember that we're purely analyzing the early vote here. We're not looking at other polls. In terms of Michigan, we have around a 3-point lead for mail-in and early in-person votes on the Democrats, and then around a 10-point lead in mail-in ballots. Now, when you compare this to 2020 numbers, go over to Michigan, the Republicans actually had a lead of about 2 points for both mail-in and early in-person votes. So for that reason, I'm also going to put Michigan in the lean Democratic column. And the thing with Michigan is that it is the bluest state out of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I know Minnesota is quite blue too. I think more blue. But when comparing Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and then Minnesota, yeah. Or with Michigan. Next, we're going to do New Hampshire, which I know this is going to be a surprise. New Hampshire hasn't really been in the talks of being a swing state. But if you look at the early votes in New Hampshire for 2024, you'll notice that the Democrats have around a 4-point lead in terms of mail-in early in-person votes, and albeit the numbers are not that large. And in mail-in ballots requested, the Democrats also have a good lead. It's around 5 points. But if you look in 2020 for New Hampshire's numbers, you'll notice that the Democrats had an insane 20-point lead, and actually around here, it's at more like 30 points for mail-in and early in-person ballots. They had almost 30-point lead. They had a 30-point lead against the Republicans. And the numbers are around 200 and 175,000. Right now we're at 86,000, so this could still multiply and we could still see more Democrats. But right now, because of the sheer difference between the amount of votes that have been received by the Democrats compared to the Republicans in 2020 and 2024, I'm actually going to put New Hampshire, just based on the model, on a lean Republican pipeline. This does go against many of the polls, and frankly, I'm only considering the early voting comparisons for this video. So next we go to Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is going to be an interesting one. Pennsylvania right now, the Democrats have a lead of about 5 points. So it's a lot of points that they have a lead in, and this is in both mail-in, early in-person, and mail-in ballots. But when you look at the state of Pennsylvania in 2020, Democrats actually had an even greater lead. They had an almost 30-point lead, which is pretty crazy. Actually, matter of fact, they had a 35-point lead in mail-in and early in-person ballots, at least in the amount that were returned, and it was predominantly Democratic by over 35 points. So the fact that now they've managed to cut this lead, at least for the Republicans, to around a 20-point suggests to me that that 10-point difference is going to have an impact in the way Pennsylvania goes. And if you look at the amounts, there were 3 million over here that were requested. There's much less ballots requested this time, only 2 million. That's only around 66%. And so I don't really see it going well for the Democrats, and simply because of the data, the 10-point difference is not enough to convince me that Kamala Harris can win the state. So I will have to put this in a lean Republican sector. So next up, we're going to go to Virginia. In terms of Virginia, we see that there are around a 10-point lead for the Democrats in mail-in and early in-person votes, and around a 12-point lead for mail-in ballots for the Democrats. And when you compare it to 2020's numbers for Virginia, we see that early voting, they also had a significant lead, although this time the lead was around 15 points for mail-in ballots, and then for mail-in and early in-person votes cast, it was around 18-point lead. So the lead has shrunk around to 10 points, but the difference is only around 5, and so because of that, I don't find it significant enough to swing Virginia to the Republicans, so I'll have to put it under the Democrats. And the reason why I also think it's going to go to Democrats is because they're very close to Washington, D.C. They have a lot of Democratic support in those major urban centers, and I just don't really see it flipping. It had a big margin last time they voted. I think, yeah, almost a 10-point. They had a 10-point margin. I just don't see how that can be changed, really. But obviously, even just considering the early vote, the difference was only around 5 points, which is much less than something like 10, which you find in Pennsylvania. So in North Carolina, which we're going to be doing next, we see that Republicans are leading by around a point in both mail-in and early in-person votes cast. And when you compare it to 2020, you see that the Republicans were actually not in the lead. It was the Democrats. And the Democrats had a lead of around 5 points, which is a lot of a switch, especially when you consider that a lot of votes have already been casted and counted. So, or not counted, but cast. So the fact that there's a point difference in here compared to in 2020, where Democrats had a big lead, tells me that North Carolina is going to swing or remain Republican. So next we're going to be going over to Georgia, and at this point Trump has won the election based on this map, but we still have to do Georgia. So when we go to Georgia, we'll notice that the Republicans have around a 3-point lead in mail-in and early in-person votes cast, and in mail-in ballots, the Democrats have a lead by over 20 points. But if you look in 2020, a really interesting story appears. It shows that Republicans both leaded in the mail-in and early in-person ballots, so around 8 points. And in terms of mail-in ballots requested, we do see that Democrats also led in 2020 against Georgia by around, 7 points, 7 points. So it's very interesting numbers because we do see a Democratic lead here by around 6 points and a Republican lead by 8 points. But overall, when you compare the mail-in and early in-person votes, it looks like the Democrats are gaining traction in Georgia. It looks like they have gained up. And since Republicans have lost their +8 to +3, and the difference in 2020 between a Biden and Donald Trump presidency was around 0.3%, the fact that Democrats have gained this much leads me to believe that Georgia will remain blue. And so this is going to be my final election prediction.